Hi everyone, my name is Ziamara Lorenzo, and I am part of the steering committee for JLF. I'm excited for our talk this evening, Jews, Money, and Jewish Culture. And we're here today in the spirit of having a conversation between leaders within our community to talk about cultural creation and what it means to have a culture that can help us heal and bring people into a Judaism and into a movement that is dynamic, alive, and brings forth a more liberatory world. A little bit about JLF before we kick off. We were formed in 2017, and JLF exists to support progressive, social justice-oriented philanthropy and to bridge the growing gap that our founders and those who support saw existing between organized conservative Jewish counterparts, conservative counterparts, and honestly, that we saw that that gap that was less responsive to the needs of social movements that were being addressed by secular philanthropy. At our core, we seek to elevate different voices and perspectives and building a more diverse, inclusive, and intersectional movement. The last thing I'll say before I turn over to Ariel is that regarding this evening and why do we do political education in addition to our grant making, which is the core of the work that we do, but we see political education as an incredibly important cornerstone to amplifying the work of our grantees. And specifically with as I shared before, there are a lot of people who are dissatisfied with institutions, specifically Jewish institutions, that are not really supporting the progressive, kind of more expansive calls to action that we especially so much need right now. And for JLF to be in a position to specifically connect the dots between philanthropy as a key driver to amplifying, providing the literal resources to amplify the voices in our community that can help us have a more forward, progressive, expansive, socially expansive dialogue is what we are about. And so to that end, education, especially political education, like we're going to engage in this evening and discussing how creative expressions are especially important to that dialogue, helps our political movements, helps the grantees who come to JLF do the work that they do and for us to support them. And again, at its core for us, doing the work that we do with our grantees and all of you being here together this evening is part of the creation of the liberatory world that we envision. So to that end, I'm going to just give a brief intro to Ariel, and then we'll turn over so we can officially start our evening. Ariel is a mixed Moroccan and Ashkenazi artist and a community council member for Golden Thread's 2024 season for Palestine. Ariel paints, sings, and co-produces immersive art and ritual spaces across the U.S. Recent highlights include Morocco to the Bay, a diasporic prayer performance in 2023, Albany, a fence around the Torah from 2021-2022, Jewish Museum of Maryland, Queering Jewish Diasporas, in Oakland rather, and a solo exhibition orienting practice in Boston. Ariel, I'm going to transition over to you, and thank you very much for everyone joining.
Ziamara, thanks so much for having us, and thank you to everybody at JLF and everybody at home coming in on Erev, the eve of Rosh Hashanah, of the Jewish New Year. So just at the top, I want to make an access request. If you are popping into Zoom and going to be featured with your video, a request to leave your background unblurred and without a green screen background. It's a visual access need, as those can be a seizure trigger. So thank you so much for participating with that access need in mind. Now, without further ado, I'm here to introduce Lex Rofberg and Aurora Levins Morales, our special guests for the evening. Lex Rofberg is a Jewish educator and activist, there he is, who serves as senior Jewish educator for Judaism Unbound. Lex oversees Judaism Unbound's Unyeshiva, which is a digital center for Jewish learning and unlearning. Lex produces and co-hosts its weekly podcast, as well as facilitating regular forms of communal gathering on Zoom. Lex was ordained as a rabbi through Aleph, the Alliance for Jewish Renewal, and serves on the board of directors for Tikkun Olam Productions, the Shalom Center, and Evolve, groundbreaking Jewish conversations. Welcome, Lex. Can't wait to chat with you tonight. Next up, we've got, Next up, we've got poet Aurora Levins Morales. Aurora Levins Morales is a cuir Ashkenazi Boricua writer of poetry, essays, and fiction. Aurora is a child of blacklisted communist parents. She grew up immersed in social justice movements and the poetry of liberation, and came into public voice as part of the collective eruptions of radical art of the 70s and 80s. She's the author of 9 books, including Medicine Stories, Kindling, Remedios, and Silt. Aurora's poetry is widely used in synagogues and churches, in schools, at rallies, painted on walls, recited at weddings, maybe yours, translated into 7 languages, reprinted in dozens of anthologies. Aurora's most recent work, Rimonim, Ritual Poetry of the Jewish Liberation, is forthcoming through Ayin Press this year, and it's available for pre-order now if you haven't already gotten your copy. So that's our crew. We'll take a deep breath and arrive together. So for folks with us at home and for this group of us here, we'll just take a second. If it's comfortable for your body, place a hand on your heart, on your belly, whatever part of your body wants some touch right now. We'll just take one deep breath and then we'll dive into our conversation. All right, welcome. So we'll open with a question. And this question, I'm looking at my friend Aurora. Aurora, you articulated a vast, enormous, overflowing question when we 3 first chatted about this topic a couple weeks ago. And I'm going to start with this question, and it will actually bookmark our time together. I'll end with it as well. But it feels important to frame everything we do together tonight with the possibility of the world that you offer for us to consider through this unlocking question. Folks at home, maybe actually for our team on Zoom, we'll pop the question into the chat, and we welcome you to consider journaling on it and sharing your answers with us in the chat, either in real time or at any point throughout the talk, and we can bring it into the Q&A later. We want to hear your response as well. So here's how we'll begin. Thank you, Aurora, for the question. And Aurora, I'll pose it to you. How do we create the conditions for people to live lifelong revolutionary lives? How do we hold big vision and current difficulty in a sustainable way for the rest of our lives? How do we create conditions? How do we hold big vision and current difficulty? How?
I'm going to answer first with a poem. Ve'ahavta. Say these words when you lie down and when you rise up, when you go out and when you return, in times of mourning and in times of joy. Inscribe them on your doorposts, embroider them on your garments, tattoo them on your shoulders, teach them to your children, your neighbors, your enemies. Recite them in your sleep here in the cruel shadow of empire. Another world is possible. Thus spoke the prophet Roquedalton. All together they have more death than we, but all together we have more life than they. There is more bloody death in their hands than we could ever wield unless we lay down our souls to become them, and then we will lose everything. So instead, imagine winning. This is your sacred task. This is your power. Imagine every detail of winning, the exact smell of the summer streets in which no one has been shot, the muscles you have never unclenched from worry gone soft as newborn skin, the sparkling taste of food when we know that no one on earth is hungry, that the beggars are fed, that the old man under the bridge and the woman wrapping herself in thin sheets in the back seat of a car, and the children who suck on stones nest under a flock of roofs that keep multiplying their shelter. Lean with all your being towards that day when the poor of the world shake down a rain of good fortune out of the heavy clouds and justice rolls down like waters. Defend the world in which we win as if it were your child. It is your child. Defend it as if it were your lover. It is your lover. When you inhale and when you exhale, breathe the possibility of another world into the 37.2 trillion cells of your body until it shines with hope. Then imagine more. Imagine the crimes of our age, the grotesque inhumanities of greed, the sheer and astounding shamelessness of it, the vast fortunes made by stealing lives, the horrible normalcy it came to have is unimaginable to our heirs, the generations of the free. Don't waver. Don't let despair sink its sharp teeth into the throat with which you sing. Escalate your dreams. Make them burn so fiercely that you can follow them down any dark alleyway of history and not lose your way. Make them burn clear as a starry drinking gourd over the grim fog of exhaustion and keep walking. Hold hands, share water, keep imagining so that we and the children of our children's children may live. I wrote that poem because I needed it. I wrote it after the Pulse massacre. And it very quickly went viral. And as Ariel said, got used in many, many, many different situations. Because it called on us to imagine. And that's really the first answer to your question. We can't build what we can't imagine. And the practice of imagining outside the constraints of the current moment is, I think, absolutely essential part that radical culture can play and that sustains our movement and needs to be sustained by it. Punto. You're muted, my dear.
Amen. Ashe. Thanks, Aurora. Wow. Escalate our dreams. Escalate your dreams. Lex, I'm going to put this question to you. I'll repeat it just to get it back in the room. Aurora, woo, thank you. Lex, how do we create the conditions for people to live lifelong revolutionary lives? How do we hold big vision and current difficulty in a sustainable way for the rest of our lives?
So I have a one-sentence cliffhanger reply for now that will build the suspense, I guess, for more later. The way to the Jewish world that we're dreaming of isn't about taking what exists in reality right now and finding ways to change it. It's about taking what exists in potential, ready to be co-created, and building it.
Can you drop that gem one more time so we can let it sink in?
Yes, and I'll put it in the chat too. The way to the Jewish world that we're dreaming of isn't about taking what exists in reality right now and finding ways to change it. It's about taking what exists in potential, ready to be co-created, and building it.
Chazak u'barach.
Haiku.
We got some poets in the house. All right. Well, okay. So now that we've opened the field wide, and begun with the zoom out as our tradition has primed us to do, I want to dial it back in and think about the particular table that we were invited to convene at tonight, the three of us, and that's the table of the Jewish Liberation Fund. And so I'm going to ask you each, if you would be so kind, and we're on the cusp of 5785. We're about to close this harrowing, persistent, yet still we're together year. And I'm curious, just everything we do in terms of conversation and relationality happens in place and time. Even though we're together in zeros and ones right now, we're each grounded in our specificities, all of them, our practices, our places. So I'm spreading my feet right now to remember that. I usually am on Ohlone land in the SF Bay area. Today I'm in Boston, Massachusetts land. And that matters. Like the way I receive and speak a question always is playing in place and time. So I'll ask you each to tell us a story related to your personal experiences with Jewish philanthropy. And we've all been Jewish professionals and doing arts and culture bearing work for decades. So how does that question play for you in this place at this time? I'll repeat the question. And Lex, I'll ask you to start this time. Tell us a story related to your personal experiences with Jewish philanthropy.
Thank you. Amen on the point of context. I am in the city known as Providence, or as I call it, Divine Providence on Narragansett and Wampanoag land. And happy Tuchus Hashanah, everyone. It is the caboose of the year, as you mentioned, the Erev Erev. So that's the day that we are in. Personal story about my relationship to Jewish philanthropy, and our shared visions going forward. I learned about this thing called Jewish Liberation Fund a few years ago. I saw a video. Many of you here probably also saw the same video. And I say that not to plug this important organization that we're all gathered here for, but because my genuine, true reaction at that moment was, I think, using that potential word I used in my sentence before, I think that in potential, if this becomes what it hopes to, this will be the most important shift to Jewish communal work, Jewish nonprofits, Jewish art that there can be. If this project grows to many orders of magnitude beyond what it has been so far. I say that for a number of reasons, because it's in a time with the urgent needs that we see right now, starting with Palestine and also in so many other areas of the world, it's really hard to feel like zooming out and talking about how Jewish nonprofits are funded or how Jewish communal work gets or does not get done. Like, it's really hard to feel like that zoom out is meeting the needs of the right now when people are actually being killed on a day-to-day basis. But I do actually believe that this is among the most important interventions in Jewish society right now. And I say that because what I said before, I'll elaborate a little bit. I believe we need to operate as if we are inhabiting like we have to like breathe in and presume we are in like mid 1800s, Turtle Island or American Judaism. And I say mid 1800s because that is just before like the beginnings of Jewish institutional landscape as we know it existed at all. Like we have to hold deeply that the Jewish institutional landscape that would be aligned with the values of those in this space and with justice is not a story that is sort of we have the infrastructure and we just need to sort of move it to align with our future. But instead, we have to seed. I think like plant metaphors are right, like because it takes a long time. We have to plant the seeds. I guess the logo of Jewish Liberation Fund, does it incorporate leaves? Yeah. Like we have to plant those seeds to yield the future that we're building. And that's hard because starting things from scratch is abundantly more challenging than starting from what we already have. But I think the exciting thing about Jewish Liberation Fund is its potential ability and others' ability to really push beyond the limited notions of what Jewish communal worship and practice and culture and literature and art can be, and not start from a, here's where we are now, how can we futz a little, but rather, here's where we must get to. What is our path there? And I think that we need the resources to be able to do that level of ambitious work. And I think what we have to really charge ourselves with is a huge amount of responsibility to actually do the creation work. We're in Genesis. We're in Genesis. We're not in post getting together in Exodus, like congealed and ready with our mission statement. We're in a building mode, and we have to do this together. I apologize if this sounds really like amorphous. We can get more specific as we go. But like, what excited me about Jewish Liberation Fund is that this is a project that is interested in really thinking about the system, and not just little gaps here, little gaps there, but rather coming together as whatever we call ourselves, the Jewish left or diasporists, or as Jews. Maybe we're just Jews and we hold that label without any adjective before it. But coming together and building, I think we need to find a way, we're going to talk about this later, to move beyond the ways in which we are pushed out of spaces, the ways in which we are not, our voices are not seen as authentically Jewish, all of which is true, and start to create that which will be aligned with what we need to see.
All right, I'm gonna put you on the spot. You can take this or not, as you wish. That was beautiful. Cool. In the spirit of the game we just played, because we are practicing, we're culture makers here. So how we do anything is how we do everything. So also for folks at home, both what we're saying and how we're saying is part of what we learn Torah. Like that's part of how we do it. It's oral Torah. So Lex, if you had to distill what you just described with a fully painted picture into one chap, which is a Yiddish word meaning like one vort, one word, one bite, how would you distill that? If you were to respond, I'll the question just so you'll have this and then we can do this. I asked you to tell us a story related to your personal experiences with Jewish philanthropy. What's one nugget of a story that really lands this for you?
Okay. So I'll try to ground it a little more specifically.
Yeah, even just a quick, like one image, one scene.
A few years ago, this was, I guess, 6 or 7 years ago now. A number of us here in Rhode Island, in Providence, looked around and we saw what we see almost every Jewish holiday, which is there's not anything happening that feels aligned with our values. That feels, at the time, I mean, this was a moment where we felt called, and it's still a moment, to do anti-fascist organizing and to tie it to holidays like Purim. And so and I wasn't the primary leader of this, but I was a first follower and helper. We found a lovely spot in downtown Providence and built the most raucous, wild, and it was trans-led because I wasn't one of the primary leaders, and it was an unbelievable diverse constituency of people basically finding a spot in our community, generating the Purim that we needed to see. It was raucous, it was wild, it was gut-wrenching also, and making it happen. And you know, we found a way to do this, and I think this is notable to the story, with actually very small budget lines. I think that's part of what we need to be doing right now is for the time being, we have to work on the numerator and the denominator, like increasing the resources we have, and also with what we do have, finding ways to have it really go a long way. And so we built the Purim that we needed to see. And I think in cities around the country and the world, we are faced with a decision when each holiday rolls around, when each moment of potential Jewish meaning making rolls around. And that decision is, do we sort of do we concede that which is happening in the mainstream, a phrase I tend to use very little, Do we concede that that's where Jewish lives, and that what our work is to try our very best to push it to be a different and better version of itself? Or do we start to really take the responsibility to build it in our own image, and I believe in our broader historical Jewish image and beyond, in solidarity with others? And I believe that we need to be doing some of the former, but mostly the latter. And so that is one example where we did it. And I think with each holiday since, it's something that I strive to do over and over.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing from your life.
And yes, to the chat. I mean, yeah, I mean Zionism, but I don't just mean Zion. Like, I mean, yes, that most of our mainstream Jewish organizations are Zionist organizations, but I think even beyond that, our mainstream skews very, it skews upper class or upper middle class. It skews all sorts of ways that are not fully representative of the people gathered here.
Thank you, Lex. Aurora, in this place, at this time, would you tell us a story related to your personal experiences with philanthropy?
Yeah. I am in Maricao, in Boriquen, colonial name Puerto Rico. I was thinking about how I have this mirror story because I am one of the founding steering committee members of JLF and have also been funded by JLF. And I agree with Lex's assessment of the importance of JLF in what we call the movement ecosystem, that we're not just plugging a hole here and plugging a hole there. We're thinking about how the entire ecosystem of the Jewish left works, and also consciously and openly seeking to change how Jewish philanthropy works. I've been a movement poet since my teens. I'm 70 years old now. I'm sick and disabled. I hate meetings. And every chance I get to go to a JLF meeting just fills my heart with joy. To be able to scan that landscape and see how we can resource those seeds that Lex was talking about, how we can give them startup fertilizer and some water, how we can have many, many, many people visioning a future that we're pointing ourselves to. And I often use the metaphor of having a vision, which is our navigational star. And then we're tramping through the muck, but we need to keep pointing toward that star and kind of live partly in the present and partly in the future we envision. And so getting to participate from both ends in the work of JLF, I see it embodying that approach to movement. When I am an individual artist. I'm not in an organization. The writing that I do is not only supportive of Palestinian liberation, not only rejecting the idea that the state of Israel is the solution to anti-Semitism, I'm also proposing a way of being that shakes up a lot of the things that Lex was talking about, a lot of the different ways that our institutions have become crusty and rigid and are, you know, class, race, gender, like many, many ways stacked for a specific, more privileged group. And so those organizations are less likely to fund me. When I'm saying, I talk about global Jewish culture. For me, diaspora is a little bit still center and margin. But JLF and RISA funded me to write Rimonim, this collection that people who have been using my poetry for clamoring to have it gathered in one place and available differently. It was the first time in my life that I had adequate money to live on, to make art, to make revolutionary art. The first time in my entire life that I had a living wage to do this work. It would not have been possible for me as a disabled, sick, elder, low-income person living on a farm in the mountains of Puerto Rico to do that labor. And that book would not have come into the world. And, you know, I have the privilege of seeing all the different proposals that come into JLF and the joy of being able to make that true for other people who have struggled, some of them for decades, some of them just starting out and having no idea where to turn to get resourced. That very consciously, intentionally resourcing those sort of activated, it's almost like acupuncture points in the social body, you know, putting energy into those spots and seeing the enrichment and strengthening of our ability to envision differently, to create microcosms of what we want to build. It's incredibly joyful for me. So I'm very privileged to be wearing both hats.
Aurora, that's awesome. You Baruch Shekivant, bless you that you pointed us there. You hit on a future question, so I'm just going to bring it out loud into the room now. The question we had talked about was, what is the role of progressive philanthropy? Earlier, we asked about Jewish philanthropy. How has that played in your life and career? So specifically, I think you might have already touched on this, but if you want to expand, what is the role of progressive philanthropy? And how does a culture of monetarily valuing, substantively monetarily valuing the arts impact your work as a culture bearer? Is there anything you want to add? You already fleshed that out, but this piece of progressive philanthropy specifically, and also like, what is that? Maybe Lex, you can help us flesh that out too. Like, what is this proposition, progressive philanthropy? But Aurora, how has that shifted the needle of the possible for your life and work as a culture bearer? And I'm actually I'm gonna put in one more acupuncture point. Take it if you want it. Otherwise, we'll move to another part of the social body. But earlier in your answer, you mentioned living both in the present and the future. And in my Jewish cosmology, I map that sometimes onto the Melech Navi dichotomy, which like sort of like the king in one point of the social body, if we use the magistrate as a metaphor, you know, complex, problematic metaphor, and the Navi, the prophet, in another part of the social body, perhaps even occupying a different part of the landscape. Like one is screaming from the hilltops, one is in the center of the walled city. So if any of this constellation of images is useful, take it away and we'll jam on that for a few minutes and then Lex will pass it to you.
Okay. Well, yeah, let me say, progressive philanthropy is a pretty broad spectrum that includes liberal philanthropy to some degree, all the way over to more radical. And, you know, coming out of the sort of nonprofit culture, there's a tendency to fund projects for short periods of time, not to fund individuals, to want very measurable impacts when a lot of time art making, you know, I get asked how big is my audience? I have no idea. My work is passed along through networks. So it's a very, in a way, it still suffers from the framework of capitalism of how you define productivity, and for such an individualist society, a lack of investment in individual artists. I'm a movement elder. I hold all kinds of collective memory. My work is catalytic. It's not reflected in income, but you know, people are reading them at demonstrations and you know, using them in all these different ways. It clearly nourishes the movement. I get a lot of response telling me that, but philanthropy hasn't caught up with how do you fund a prophetic voice. And that's as far as I'll go with your prophet and king magistrate thing. But as progressive philanthropy needs to start thinking about art differently. It's not about producing a show. It's not about finishing a book. It has its own time frames, and so it's not, doesn't necessarily go with the funding cycle, but that it's there's a certain piece of the red spectrum of light that signals trees that it's okay to bloom. That starts that process in the spring. And I feel like radical artists do that. We project that pink light out and say, it's okay to bloom right now. It's okay to think bigger. It's okay to reach. It's not the framework of most funders. I think it could be. Certainly JLF and also Rise Up, and those are the two that have, and the Jews of Color Initiative also funded the art in the book. Changing how philanthropy thinks about artists and how the movement thinks about artists. We're not decorators. We're not gumball machines where you put in a penny and you get a poem or a poster or whatever. So I think really taking seriously the transformative power of the arts and funding it as a critical intervention in having that star clear and knowing how to walk toward it.
Thank you. Lex, shall I repeat it? You think you got it?
I think I'm good. I mean, the first thing I wanted to say is about the beautiful reflection of living in both the present and the future. I don't say this to be grandiose or kitschy or cute. I think Jews are time travelers. Like, Judaism is a time traveling tradition. On the page of the Talmud, like, you have in the middle a section that features people from the 3rd century talking to people in the 6th century, which can't have ever happened. Then they are surrounded visually by people from the Middle Ages of, 11th, 12th, etc. centuries. And then we ourselves insert ourselves into the page. So, like, we time travel, and we need to own our time traveling tradition if we're going to get anywhere on the art front. Because I think that art in and of itself, I mean, look, the work I do on a day-to-day basis, and maybe this is helpful to this conversation, is not something that others look at and say as clearly as with Aurora, your amazing poetry, like, oh, Lex, what he does is like Jewish art. Like, that's not, when people look at me organizing a digital Jewish community, creating a podcast, hosting events on that, like, I don't think people look at it as art, but I think that I think we need to find the ways in which our work is art, because art does have some superpowers that, like, art still, I agree with you. I think we live in a society that has disparaged and marginalized the power of art. And we even live specifically in a Jewish society that, because of the dynamics of continuity discourse, like privileges in funding and every other way, the kinds of Jewish activities that most directly lead to Jews gathering in rooms to then meet Jews that then create children that are more like, and Jewish art, there are less clear-cut correlations between people connecting deeply to Jewish art with the creation of future, like, reproductive humans than there are to certain other things. And so that's a point against Jewish art in the funding ecosystem, which is atrocious, right? Like that shouldn't be a point against art. Art is not only valuable because it leads to, I don't know, mixed dancing or whatever it leads to, like, it's valuable in and of itself. And so we have to find that. We have to be able to channel the ways in which, even as there are those, like, negative sides to Jewish art and culture production, there still is a kernel of, I don't want to say privilege, it's not privilege, but there are, when certain ideas are conveyed via artistic forms, they often land better than when they are conveyed via prose or via other ways. And I think even now, of like, I believe, and I'm biased on this, we mentioned I'm on the board of Tikkun Olam Productions, which is the production studio that is behind Israelism, a film that hopefully folks here have seen. People watching the film Israelism, I really think there is like an emotional, there is a set of ways in which our bodies literally feel and shift as a result of a film creation that reflects on the ways in which many of us, were indoctrinated to see Israel as this can do no wrong place, taught to be deeply Zionist, and how many of us unlearned that. In my experience, engaging that through art, like a film in Israelism, it's just so much more impactful or productive than whatever we might do in other respects to try and move people and organize people. And so I think we have to notice that superpower of art and culture and really harness it, because we have to use every tool in the toolbox right now. And I think art we see as like, oh yeah, when we can, let's do like beautiful art. But that actually needs to be a must.
I just wrote down storytelling is a superpower.
And
Storytelling
time traveling.
at the heart of all organizing is storytelling. We're trying to shift the stories we live by, and art reaches people on a kind of full spectrum where imparting information runs up against the argument barriers in the frontal lobe. It's a very different process to tell a story versus making a speech, versus handing somebody a leaflet. And I think that superpower has really been underestimated, but it's very, very ancient and very, very strong.
Wow. All right, my team. So I'm taking a peek at the clock. We began this gathering a few minutes late. So for folks at home, we'll invite you to stay just 5 or 6 minutes longer so we can bring your questions into the room. I want to reveal a little bit more of my own position. Partly, I can do that because I moved through the movement as an individual artist. And I've worked with so many Jewish organizations throughout my career. And part of why I think I've persisted through this position of artist is the freedom that it has allowed me to be sort of a Mary Poppins-like figure in and out of different organized institutional Jewish spaces, but still to retain some autonomy and agency. And like Aurora described, imagine a world, or also Ulex, like imagine a world where there was a mainstream normative funding mechanism where folks could, take up positions inside of the mainstream, take up positions outside of the mainstream, move back and forth seamlessly between those roles. So that's a vision I bring to the table. I'm also organizing out west in the so-called Bay Area on Ohlone land with a group of artists called Bay Area Jewish Artists for Palestine. And I'll take this moment to say, of course, I'm speaking as Ariel Tonkin, not as the Jewish Liberation Fund, but this is me and my work right now. And we've been pushing Jewish institutions to really look at where does our money come from? What else is that money going to in terms of militarism, in terms of funding war in our names? And I'm part of a movement of millennials and Gen Zs, and intergenerational movement calling for not in our name. And I'm bringing all of that to the table because of where we got in this conversation about time travel, past and future at the same time, sort of playing harmonics across rooting and ancestral beginnings and daring to dream in the possibility of vibrant, vital, alive, utopic futures, which is an imaginal exercise I must continue to do if I'm going to dare to try to create something new under these conditions. So I'd love to end with the question we started with, and I'll share just a little bit from my own life, and then I'll pass it to you all. So how do I'm an artist, I'm a Jewish educator, interfaith chaplain, Muslim Jewish organizer. So how do I create the conditions for people to live lifelong revolutionary lives, however I want to interpret that? How do I hold my big vision and current difficulty in a sustainable way for the rest of my life? So in this place, at this time, the final hours of 5784, start by coming down very basically to my own beating heart, systole, diastole, in and out in this borrowed body. That's number one. And my Jewish tradition taught me how to do that from when I was young. So that's a profound gift of my life. Number two is that I have also the gift of, I've built up many years of practice Jewish ritual practice, prayer practice, and fine art practice. So I know that I can rely on ritual protocols, methods, when my own heart, when my own mind, when maybe it's Aurora, to use your metaphor, when I can't necessarily trust the story that I am living inside of. And maybe when I don't know where ground is, or I'm very aware that I'm at a time of massive change and horizon line or ground is changing faster than my body can perceive. I try to zoom out from my just that one sort of perceptual mechanism in that way, come back to my body, come back to my sensing body, and smell something, look at something, remember that I'm just a human animal and I can relate in the most basic way. And I can pick back up these old ritual technologies that are much older than my small life. That's how I ground myself. From that place, I can find my own heart, my own body. From that place, I can be responsible to reach across to another human being, remembering my humanity through their eyes. So that's a daily, hourly practice. And I'm not going to pretend that that's not, the depression is there, the terror is there, the abject fear is there. But I try to say, okay, this is bigger than me. So what can I reach on to hold myself? That's my draft answer of the question. I'm going to repeat it back to you all. We'll close with just a quickie from each of us, and then we'll open the floor to this incredible room of folks who are also engaged in these practices so we can actually have a wider conversation. So closing remarks on these questions. How do we create the conditions for people to live lifelong revolutionary lives? How do we hold big vision and current difficulty in a sustainable way for the rest of our lives? Whichever one of you is
Wow.
ready, jump in.
I'm just feeling called to Aurora's two-word phrase from the opening poem, imagine winning. Imagine winning. And I do think that imagining, I mean, Ariel, you just said something beautiful about how that imaginal act of identifying the future, like it is a must if we're going to take a risk of starting something new. I mean, yeah, it's a must. We have to have imaginations. And again, that's why art is not a side project, but central to this. But imagine winning with no correction to your poem, but only my like additive or Gemara, add on to the poem. I would say notice wins. Like notice that we actually are in a winning process. Now, I don't want to, we haven't stopped the daily absolute catastrophe and like we haven't achieved the wins we need to for Palestinians, for our world. And I opened up an email or a social media recently, and like there was a post online of this open communities website with like dozens of communities that are actively like stating themselves as non-Zionist, or at the very least like calling very vociferously for ceasefire and working with rabbis for ceasefire. And then I got an email from Jewish Voice for Peace about an overlapping list, some others that are like anti-Zionist congregations. Like, we got to remember that even like 6 years ago, there was no dozens of high holiday communities for folks on the left on Palestine. That wasn't a thing. We are in fact making progress. We're not making the urge. We need to make more desperately. And we have to like hold optimism and hold and notice when there is good and when the seedlings are sprouting, to use that planting metaphor again. So my best answer to how we build this moving forward is notice when we've laid, I don't know, the first layer of Legos, whatever I'm really bad at Legos. That's like I've always been terrified of Legos. I'm like, that's my like fear, is building things. Other people are afraid of public speaking. But we're building things, and we have to hold that it's working to some degree, because that's the model for how we continue to build on it.
Uruguayan writer Eduardo Galeano, in an essay called Defense of the Word, says, "We are what we do, but most of all what we do to change what we are." I think that what we are building is ourselves and each other, the relationships, the changes that take place in us. In many ways, the most important outcome of any particular fight is how the people in it are transformed and go on to tackle other challenges. But I would say, since we've already done the imagining the future thing pretty well, being kind to one another within our movements, not taking our differences so very, very passionately seriously, figuring out that there's a difference between a caucus and a coalition, and coalitions are the ones that have the big wins. We have to learn how to be with people we don't perfectly align with. We don't need to perfectly align in order to win something together. And Ariel, I would like to share something of yours in that context, which is about braiding our lives together. Single strands are not as strong as rope. This is in my book, Rimonim. Gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. And, you know, practicing walking the road together. I love quoting other poets. So Antonio Machado, Spanish poet, the one who said, "Traveler, there is no road, you make the road by walking." That we need to practice better how to walk together, even if we're at different paces and we might not have the exact same definition of the destination. If we have that star, and I don't use the word utopia, I use the word liberated. A world in which everybody's well-being is held collectively. I think we can agree on that, even if we don't agree on the exact way to get there, exactly what it's going to look like. And so for me, it's both holding a vision of possibility and being in fellowship with one another as we travel toward it, that we envision it and we walk toward it together. That's how.
Amazing. Another Baruch Shekivant, another bless you that you pointed us there. I think we'll end our discussion, open the floor with some words in translation from Antonio Machado, which are always fitting for this season, Baruch Shekivant. So in translation, this excerpt is, "Last night I dreamt, marvelous error, that there was a beehive here inside my heart, and the golden bees were making white combs and pure honey from my old failures." So may each of us return to the self-compassion to know that making is a process of remaking, and our materials are reusable, and our tradition is embedded with technology for tshuva. In fact, it's imperative, it's incumbent upon us. So Antonio Machado brings in the bees, and that reminder that the most sweet, luxurious, you know, our substance of Rosh Hashanah, honey, our key metaphor is the alchemy of what was before and the transmutation of matter. And each of us created beings. And that's not just anthropocentric, right? Each of us created beings, all of us have the innate capacity to create. It's our God-given gift if you're a theist, and I see Rabbi David Cooper here, so even if you're not, yeah, it's just part of the beauty of being alive. So I want to bless each of you in your practices. Aurora, jump in.
And the cooperation of female insect workers.
There we go, bringing in the queer theory, always, love it.
In the beehive.
In the beehive, yeah, in the more than human kin. Lex, Aurora, thank you so much. I want to thank JLF for hosting us all, making space for this really important conversation. And let's hear a little bit from all of you. So I think we'll stick around. We started about 10 minutes late, so we'll stick around for about 8 more minutes. And I'm going to see, yeah, let's see here. All right, so there's a few questions that were pulled for us from the team. And if there are any more burning ones, you can pop them right back into the chat and Lex, Aurora, or I will grab them. So starting with a question from Vanessa, is the goal of liberation reached through the goal of more equal philanthropy? I'll repeat it. is the goal of liberation, and or you gifted us the word liberation as an alternative to utopia, is the goal of liberation reached through the goal of more equal philanthropy? Either one of you guys, feel free to take it.
I wouldn't say more
No.
equal philanthropy. I would say philanthropy targeted to the points of change. It's not about it being equal across the board. It's about identifying points of shift and resourcing them.
I really like that response. I would say, I think, a pretty clean no. I don't think philanthropy achieves liberation. I think it is a necessary prerequisite to it. I don't say that to be like, ah, wow, but like I just think like it's you need it. But it is a step. It's not like if we had equal philanthropy tomorrow, it wouldn't achieve, like we would still have to enact the philanthropic gifts into our future. The other thing I'd say, like the point that came up really quickly a while back about supporting individuals and not just nonprofits, I really think that's pivotal, and not just individuals, but groups of individuals that are something that is not a nonprofit. Like we've got to find ways to be doing more of that, because the barriers in place for somebody who doesn't already have a nonprofit, and like the barriers that the Jewish communal nonprofit ecosystem has to folks who are publicly on the left or publicly pro-Palestine, like the barriers for them getting anything rolling to a big enough degree that they'd have a nonprofit that would then be able to get whatever grants, like there's enormous barriers. So we need to find, we need to be supporting things that are not just the 501c3s, because in order to get there, like you either have to just have the ability to set that up yourself, which requires a lot of privilege, or like you hit the wall and you never get off the ground.
Yep.
Amazing. Mic drop. I'm also thinking about my own internal bias. I had the gift to be on a grant review board recently, and of course was doing that with checkboxes and a rubric. And, you know, I moved through the movement more as an individual, more in small projects. The very system of reviewing grant applications biases me to reward existing structures. So this conversation is such a gift to me to remember, like, Ariel, check yourself. What story are you living inside of through them? Because the mechanisms are recursive, right? So again, like for each of us, maybe if one thing you take away from our conversation tonight, form matters as much as content. How we converse and like the mechanisms of our conversations are part of the materials that we mold. And it's part of what Aurora was gifting us about, like, pay attention to what story you, me, us are inside of. All right, another question from the room. And this one's not attributed, so thank you for whoever sent it. How do we get everyone out of poverty? Good question. Whether or not they are perceived as doing good work in this moment. And a follow-up question, I think it's connected. How do we, yeah, it is. How do we decouple people's perceived productivity within a movement from enabling them to exist with dignity? I'll repeat it. So how do we get everyone out of poverty? In parentheses, whether or not they're perceived as doing good work. And how do we decouple perceived productivity from product? Yeah. How do we decouple perceived productivity from moving through the world, seeing everyone with dignity?
I'll take a stab. We get people out of poverty by the change that we're talking about. This is not a project to be done in some specific way. It's about dismantling the capitalist system and class societies and profit-driven economies. So it's the big question with all of what we're talking about is, how do you achieve liberation? And that's not really on the menu of this conversation, except insofar as radical philanthropy and, in this case, culture shifting contributes to that. I would say the second question is a disability justice question in many ways. The idea of productivity that reigns in our society is a capitalist one, of certain kinds of measurable productivity, and many of our contributions to society are not considered to be productive. I mean, I think that's a really important question for those who have the capacity to do funding to address. And in our communities and in our movements, I wrote a poem for the bedridden during the summer of 2020 and the Black Lives movement erupting, and I was bedridden. And what does it mean to not be able to march and not be able to go and participate in those things and to watch it go by from, you know, through your window as you're lying propped up in a million pillows? And I wrote about in the future that looking back that we would be recognized as the old system fell apart for bearing the exhaustion of oppression in a particular way in our bodies and resting on behalf of the coming world. That we have to keep reframing, catching ourselves as we think of productivity being one particular thing. And it's very easy to fall into valuing the people who have the energy to run around and, you know, overextend themselves over the people who don't. So yeah, how do we, I don't know, it's a practice. And disability justice leader movement leads that question in our movement.
Beautiful. Lex, do you want to add anything to that one? No pressure.
No, I mean, that was amazing. My Elul work for the final day is to build enough chutzpah to feel like I can answer the how do we end poverty question. I think Aurora, you did a gorgeous job, and I'm invested in that, in answering that question. The word invested, interesting. That's that. I am interested in pursuing and being part of communities pursuing answering that question. I don't want to suggest I have a good answer approaching what we just heard. I do think we have to, at the very least, notice poverty, and notice it within our Jewish communities, notice it outside of our Jewish communities, build solidarity between and among those various categories. Yeah, we could start by really
that it's not in the room.
Yeah. And yeah, exactly. Like, understand that in this room, in our other extended rooms that are connecting in this room, that we're not talking about poverty collectively as outsiders to that question, but as people at many different intersections related to it. Yeah, that's all. That's what I would bring on that one.
Beautiful. Well, I'm gonna pick up the mantle of the vest question, vest and investment, and I'm gonna bring us to that part of the metaphor. So maybe shifting just one pivot away from by the power vested in me, and just thinking about that sort of connotation of investment. And let's actually take on like vestido, like a garment. So let's each of us, we're gonna wrap now, but let's each of us, if you would join me in a short meditation. And where we wrap. So you might be a Jew who prays with a talit, with a ritual prayer shawl, or you might be a Jew who dons a special old or new garment at the new year. And join me for a sec in finding some cloth, some texture that you can feel on your skin, either with your fingertips or just on your body. And if it's comfortable for your body, you can close your eyes. And we're going to do that imaginal practice that we drafted together, which is, what will it take for me in this new year to dare to imagine that I am enwrapped, like you said, Aurora, with enough safety, enough warmth, enough community, enough ritual, enough sense of connection, enough mitigation of my impulse to hate or to destroy, enough room to breathe, enough room to make something new with the materials I already have, enough hope to wake up again in the morning. What if I can put on this garment, this talit, this Rosh Hashanah, and remember through the old teaching, Hayom Yechaper Alechem, the day will atone for you, that all I have to do is put on the garment that is my birthright and the day will atone for me if I dare to rise to the day, if I dare to look at the actions that my body is bound up within, if I dare to both be inside of the story and the listener on the outside, questioning its edges. What if I allow myself to soften in the garment that is mine, the garment of my people, and make something new this Rosh Hashanah? Dare to dream that this is possible. Shana Tova Umetuka. Such an honor. Aurora, close us up.
I always forget to do this, but I would like to say that if you want to be part of making my life possible, I am community supported
Yes.
on Patreon. And I put rough drafts of things there.
Yep. And we ask, excellent. That's one very practical way. And JLF just dropped that. Aurora's website is in the chat, along with a direct link to Aurora's Patreon account. And for folks who are asking where you can find poetry, you can find most of that, and you can purchase Aurora's forthcoming book by following that link. And yeah, I resolved this year to support the artists in my life tangibly. I hope that you'll join me. Shana Tova Umetuka, may it be a sweet, añada buena, against all odds. Much love, everybody. Thanks for being here with us. Thanks to JLF for hosting us. Thank you so much for the amazing work that you're doing.
Thanks, y'all.